Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome to another episode of Jesus Christ and His Second Coming. I am your host, Spencer, and I'm very grateful that you decided to come back for yet another episode. Want to point out, as you can tell from previous episodes, we've got a nice background image going on today. A piece of feedback I received was that it's nice to have something other than just a straight red background. So for this particular setup, I've got a picture that I took several years ago. Feel free to drop down in the comments below, see if you can guess where this may be. Again, I'll try and move a little bit, give a little clue. The only clue I'll give is it's somewhere in the United States, so maybe somebody out there might recognize. Again, comment below what your guess is where you think this picture was taken. But not why we're here today for this picture. Actually, the reason I'm here today, or the topic I want to talk about today, has come about in response to some things that has been happening in some of the news articles, I guess, depending on where you get your news from, and in combination with a conversation that I had earlier in the week with a ward member, a brother that I've been talking with on and off over the several weeks now. And we got on this topic. He shared one of the news articles with me, and then a couple of days later, another article showed up. And so we've just been kind of back and forth talking about this topic. But let me ask you a quick question here. What do you know about tithing and how it's supposed to be used? And what's your familiarity with tithing? If you're not a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, share in the comments below what you know about tithing. And if you're somebody that has paid tithing, you're familiar with the concept of tithing, comment below with your experience. What's your experience been like with paying tithing, and how do you like paying tithing? Have you been able to point to any direct revelation or personal benefits or blessings that have come into your life as a result of being a tithe payer? So I want to talk on this topic. But before I do, real quickly, one of the things I want to point out is our social media channels and our email. So feel free to join along. If you've got any comments, concerns, questions, feel free to send me an email or drop a message in Instagram, and I'll do what I can to watch for those and to reply. Feel free to request topics to talk about. In fact, our last episode came as a result of responding to a topic requested. So if you've got something on your mind as it pertains to Jesus Christ and or his second coming, by all means, drop it in links. And just note, it doesn't necessarily have to be tied directly to his second coming. It could be something that you talked about in church or in your own personal scripture study. Maybe something that you read, came across, and stood out to you, and you kind of want to try and learn more, or you'd like my help to explain it, or to share my insights and understandings on the topic. So again, feel free to follow us on Instagram. You can use the messaging in Instagram or send us an email. And then obviously this is our YouTube channel, which is where you're already finding us. So, but with that, I want to get to the lesson today, or the topic. And this comes actually, if you've been following the news, a couple of months ago, back in, I think it was late January, early February, there was a brother in the church who used to work in the finance or in the church's investment section, who left his membership in the church and also left his job, and I guess is what we'll call a whistleblower. At least that's kind of the term that he uses for himself, criticizing the church about how they're using their tithing, and how much that has been saved, and kind of what they're doing with their funds, especially as a charity organization. And part of that original story did involve the LDS Church getting in trouble with the SEC, and having to pay $5 million in two different fines that as a result of kind of the way they had been filing some paperwork with the SEC, and the way that they were organizing funds and distributing them. And I want to add something real quickly to that notion. I read through the SEC filing actually earlier today. I read through the church's original statement in response to that article, and one of the points that the church brought out in their formal press release in response to the SEC charges was that part of the reason they had done what they had done was to provide a little bit of anonymity to just one, how much wealth the church does have, and two, where those funds are, kind of how they're being multiplied and how they're being invested, largely because the church doesn't want to be viewed as a measuring stick or a guidepost on how one should diversify their funds and invest their money. And so the concern there is that if the church, if it was more publicly available, what stocks the church was buying, or what bonds or real estate they were investing in, or other business ventures, that the um, that the saints could try and follow suit. And if any one of those ventures were to fail, drop out, the bottom fall out from underneath it, then those individuals could, you know, depending on how they've been investing, could have taken a very serious financial hit. And as a result, start having some blame against the church, is going, well, the church did it, and they're led by God, and we're following the prophet. And if this is how the church is investing, then this is how we should invest. And the reality is that's not part of why the church is here. The church is not here to be your financial advisor, to a point. There are many teachings in the scriptures about how to be wise, and we're going to actually look at some of those today. But what was interesting was then, about 2 months after that article came out, 60 Minutes, and if you're not from the United States, there's I'll call it a show, if you will, that's been around for as long as I can remember, for decades now, where they will focus on a particular news story of interest and dedicate time to studying the topic or the issue, and kind of trying to, quote unquote, shed light on what's going on. And so what happened is that they decided to do a 60 Minutes report on this situation, and they also interviewed that brother. I did listen to part of the interview. I did not get a chance to get the way through all of it. But what's interesting is that after that came out, the church then put out this, they put out a statement about their opinion or perspective about what was said in that interview. Now, this particular article isn't very lengthy, and the big thing here is that they point out really what the statement, and this is the full statement. If you go onto the church's website, this is the full statement. And it reads as such. They wrote, "The church believes in being financially responsible by carefully ensuring it has adequate resources available to fulfill its divinely appointed responsibilities. To church members who support the work of salvation through living the gospel of Jesus Christ, caring for those in need, inviting all to receive the gospel, and uniting families for eternity, will continue to move forward consistent with the gospel of Jesus Christ, which makes this world a better place. It's unfortunate 60 Minutes sought to elevate a story based on unfounded allegations by a former employee who has a different view on how the church should manage its resources." And to me personally, over here, this is, one of the key things about this situation is you have an individual who worked for the church, who has had his own personal interpretation of how the church should be managing its funds, and didn't agree with those approach, and decided to leave, and to then kind of, quote unquote, be a whistleblower, if you will, about the practices and process. The filing or the SEC issue came, when you read through it, is simply because the church wasn't filling out proper forms, and the fact that they were diversifying where those funds were being managed under multiple entities and names, in an effort to try and minimize how much any one particular entity had at as its managed resource. It's kind of an interesting situation, but then leads me to kind of two next talking points. The next one, first, is going to be just then this other article that came out. This came out on May 14th, so today's the 21st, so a week ago now, where they shared this interesting perspective about CBS's 60 Minutes segment on the church's finances missed the sweeping rags to riches history of the faith. And I read through this article and actually found this very interesting. There was a lot about the church's history from a financial perspective that I wasn't aware of. I knew about some of this, but I didn't know about other more what I'll call recent or in recent history, some of these happenings. One of the things to understand, if you're unfamiliar with the history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is that when it was first founded, the saints, the early members, were poor. I mean, beyond poor. As a result, one of the things that the saints were tasked with doing was to be better with their finances, not only as individuals, but also as an organization, as an entity, as a structure. Because the reality is that while God can do anything, he's going to use the most available means necessary to accomplish his work. And so something to think about is the Lord is going to use money because he knows and he understands that that's how humanity and society works in our way. He's going to ask that we do things to be good with money and to have good habits, both individually and as businesses and entities, and that we are making sure that we're providing an increase as a result of our efforts, and in this case specifically with finances. So one of the things that I didn't realize was this kind of the starting point here. So 60 years ago, the financial crisis engulfed the church and threatened to become the worst in the faith's history, which is saying a lot given the fact that the early saints were extremely poor. The early saints initially tried to set up their own bank and it failed. And so the fact that only 60 years ago, from 2023, which would take us, what would that do? That would take us back to the 60s, to being the worst in the faith history. That's a pretty bold statement there. So it says, for example, an apostle once secured new loans in New York City hours before the church would have defaulted on a large payment with the San Francisco bank. He awoke despondent that morning, aware that a run on the two banks owned by the church threatened to wipe out the last of its deposits. If it had failed, the church's credit rating would have been ruined, and debtors would have sued to seize church assets, according to the late historian Ronald Walker. In 1962, the church ran a $32 million deficit. So even within the last 60 years, back into the early 60s, the church was $32 million in the hole. The red ink soaking the church's books, again, in early 1963, and its financial officers worried they wouldn't be able to meet payroll for church employees. President David O. McKay moved decisively. He changed the assignment of one of the counselors in his first presidency who had overseen church finances, historians say. Now, this is something I want to point out. Some people might ask, the question is, okay, you've got the prophet of God who's running his church. Why would God allow his prophet, if he was a real prophet, to allow the prophet and the church and the saints to get into such a large amount of debt, especially $32 million in the 60s? Because that's, compared to today, it's not 32 million today. I mean, 32 million is still a lot of money. But when you adjust it for cost of living and value back in the 60s, that's a significantly higher dollar amount. So why would that happen? Well, the first thing to understand is that even prophets are still human. They still make mistakes. And God doesn't give us step-by-step directions in every aspect of our life. Okay? He allows us to make mistakes. He allows us to stumble, to do things wrong, so that way we learn and we grow. And yes, he's not meaning that just because we've made mistakes that we now become absolved of having any sort of consequences as a result of making those mistakes. That's not what happens at all. And that was one of the things that President O. McKay was making an adjustment to, knowing had this thing faulted, the church could have lost a lot of its assets. Okay, so and the fact that President O. McKay moved decisively, to me, starts to speak to he's moving now more heavily under the direction of the Spirit, especially on a topic that he's going directly to the Lord for. The reality is that some of these things, they may, depending on what they were and at the time, I don't know how much time and energy was spent directly seeking counsel from the Lord on exactly how to do things. And again, even if they had, the Lord isn't always going to give us step-by-step instructions. In fact, modern-day prophets and apostles have said the same thing. They've talked about how the Lord lets us do things, to a certain extent to learn and to grow. And sometimes the apostles will even ask the Lord for guidance on a particular topic, and he may not necessarily give a definitive yes or no. He just may not give an answer at all. And so because there's no answer, that's when the brethren then try to move forward with the best of their knowledge and ability and skill set. Continuing on with this article, a few months later, President McKay handed the role to a brand new counselor who set the church on a rigorous course of fiscal responsibility. The new strategy worked spectacularly. It led to the accumulation of assets today. Today, the church has a stock portfolio worth tens of billions of dollars. 60 Minutes said some have estimated the church's assets total as much as $150 billion, though it didn't provide a source for that figure. The church does not publicize how much money it has so it can keep the focus on its religious mission. The program suggested, again without a source, that the church takes a $7 billion in tithing each year and spends only $6 billion on its various religious and charitable causes, investing the remaining for a time of need. So what this article explains here is that on average, yearly, the church brings in $7 billion a year in tithing funds. 6 of that 7 gets used in its religious and charitable causes. Okay, and it does explain in here. In fact, it actually breaks it down right here. That $6 billion is spent annually on missions, which represent 4% of the annual charitable spending. More than $1 billion to charitable contributions to an extensive multi-campus worldwide educational system, including BYU, and there's 3 BYUs. $1 billion in humanitarian offerings. Meanwhile, it funds 30,000 congregations in global missionary efforts, as well as thousands of meetings houses, hundreds of temples, and extensive free genealogical services, all part of the church's religious mission to invite people to follow Jesus Christ. So 6 of the 7 billion gets used in these different ways, okay? All with a purpose to invite people to follow Jesus Christ. And there's many ways that people come unto Christ. They can come unto Christ directly through missionary efforts. They can come unto Christ through education. They can come unto Christ through stepping foot through a meeting house, partaking of the sacrament and being taught. People come closer unto Christ when they enter the temple and go through ordinances. People come unto Christ when they do their genealogy research. The hearts of the children are turned to their fathers, okay? So nothing here about where this money is going should be a surprise or a shock in the fact that it's outside of any sort of proper use, okay? Oh, and I also forgot to mention the humanitarian efforts between Bishop storehouses and other delivering resources when there's natural disasters all over the world. The church donates money and clothing and food and other resources to help these organizations grow and recover and do well, okay? But 1 billion of that 7, the church then saves for a rainy day. They save for the future, which again is a principle, is a concept that we as Latter-day Saints should be doing. In fact, when you hear them talk about it at conference, they say is that we as a church leadership practice what we preach. We save some for a rainy day. And because they save that $1 billion for a rainy day, they save it not just by just throwing $1 billion just in a bank and just letting it sit there. No, they diversify where those funds are while they're being saved. They'll use that $1 billion to buy real estate investments, invest in stocks and bonds and other portfolio pieces, because it's meant to diversify and grow. And again, I've got some scriptures here we'll go to that'll speak to this. But it's all for the purpose of saving for a future when when income and revenues may not be as readily available. And stop and think for a second. 30,000 congregations worldwide. How much money do you think that actually costs to run all over the world? Now, I know that there are some parts of the world that it's fairly cheap, but there are other parts of the world that's probably pretty expensive. So I find it interesting that we've got a brother who, looking at this, for whatever reason, felt like it wasn't right, separated ways. That's his choice. He's welcome to do so. That's his agency. But all of this it just has spawned kind of this unnecessary chaos and pivoting to the conversation I had with the fellow brother throughout the week. You know, one of the things that kind of stood out to me is that this is just another tactic of Satan to try and pull people away. And I actually want to turn to, it actually reminded me of this parable in Matthew 13, in the fact that this is the parable of the sower. And it reads starting in verse 4, it says, "When he sowed, some seeds fell by the side, and the fowls came and devoured them up. Some fell upon stony places where they had not much earth, and forthwith they sprang up because they had no deepness of earth." Okay, they couldn't take root. "And when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. And some fell among the thorns, and the thorns sprung up and choked them." And this was kind of the realization, or the idea that came to mind, is that this article, this story, is meant to try and get those who may already be on the fence about being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Their testimony isn't very strong. They don't have a lot of deep roots. And something like this is that straw that breaks the camel's back, as the proverb goes, right? And so as a result, we unfortunately are probably going to lose some members as a result of this conversation. Now, the thing I wanted to kind of then pivot forward into and talking about is now that we've talked about this issue, we've reacted to this issue. I want to talk about future state, because again, part of this channel is to look at the second coming of Jesus Christ, and there's the second coming event itself, and then there's post second coming, there's the millennium, where Christ is now ruling, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and he has set up his church even more so than he already has today, right? He's taking even more control over some of the affairs of humanity. When I was studying this topic, and I'm kind of trying to keep my thoughts straight here, so please bear with me as I kind of jump around a little bit. So I want to read this, and one of the things I want us to kind of start thinking about is future state with the Lord is what's that going to look like from a monetary perspective, from an income perspective, from taking care of the poor perspective, right? Because again, you look at the fact is that the church has a big portion of the funds set aside annually to take care of the needy and the poor, which is ultimately our command. And that's what we've been instructed to do. The topic that kind of came to mind was this one's is the law of consecration. How did and how does it affect us today? And again, especially on the notion of tithing, trying to help you listening to make sure that you understand that while what was done by the church leadership that caused the SEC filing was a violation of the laws of the land, and we believe in being subject to the laws of the land and following those laws of the land. The church has tried to, quote unquote, repent and make it right. They paid a fine, they paid a penalty. And the fact is that, how should we be prepared for the future and understanding kind of what's a future state? And one of the notions or the ideas here is this idea of the law of consecration. So there's this article that came out in April 2021, and it is actually in the Four Strength of Youth. So this was an article written and geared towards the youth. And in April 2021, there was this section about question and answer, and somebody asked, what is the law of consecration? How does it affect me as a youth? And this short article came out, and they said that the law of consecration is a principle the Lord gives to his covenant people. To live this principle, men and women dedicate themselves completely to building upon God's kingdom and ensuring that there are no poor among them. They give their time, talents, and material resources to serve the Lord, his church, and his children. In the early days of the restored church, the Lord instructed Joseph Smith on a particular way the saints were to live this law. This is found in D&C 42, verses 30 through 42. The saints were to consecrate, quote, or sacrifice their property to the church by giving it to the bishop. He would then give them back what they needed as their stewardship. The rest was used to help the poor. And we'll dive into this topic just a little bit more if this isn't necessarily clear what the difference is here, so hang with me. But to finish reading this article, it says, today we live this law in different ways. For instance, we serve others, we accept callings and assignments in the church, and we do our best at them and pay a full tithe and a generous fast offerings. When we do what the prophets and the Holy Ghost directs us to build up God's kingdom and to help the needy, we are living the law of consecration. And the other reason, I guess, kind of for bringing this up is as I was looking at next week's "Come Follow Me" lesson, we actually get into some of these sections in the New Testament. One of the things down in here, starting down in Matthew 25:14 through 30, we talk about using our gifts. So we just talked briefly about tithing for a minute, and one of the things that I want to point out is that tithing right now is actually it's a lower law. And I realize I'm not sharing that screen. So let me switch here real quickly. Okay. So the law of tithing is a lower law. It's what the saints are living today. The Lord initially tried to give the saints the law of consecration and to have them live it. As we just talked about it, part of that involved having everybody turn their land over to the bishop and then being allocated back out only what land they actually needed to do their work and to live. But the saints were having a lot of problems trying to follow that. And this is a future state. In fact, the law of consecration is known as a celestial law. And so, which we are not in a celestial state. This world is not in a celestial state right now. And so the world has to transition from a telestial to a terrestrial to a celestial state before the law of consecration will really be in force and be working. And it will replace the law of tithing because, again, higher laws replace lower laws. So right now, we're living this lower law of tithing. And so while tithing largely or most commonly is tied to your financial earnings, as Latter-day Saints, we pay 1/10 of our gross or of our increase, that's the word I was looking for, sorry, not gross, but of our increase, we pay that, and there's reasons why we do that, and I've got some other sources I want to look at for that, but it's part of us giving back, and that's the funds. This 10% of our increase is what the Lord uses to make things a reality and make things possible. We're building a lot of temples right now. Hard to do that without the incoming of tithing, right? So let's talk, I guess, about fundamentally why, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we're doing this. Why does the church even have this amount of money? Why are they saving? Why are they investing in stocks and bonds and real estate? Which, by the way, while they don't necessarily want to be the guide for what exactly to invest in, they do still are leading by example by saying, hey, yes, we save a portion of our income and we take that saving and we then invest it in stocks and bonds, in real estate, in other things that can cause it to multiply and grow. And that's what takes me to the scriptures. So switching back over to the scriptures here, let's take a look at Matthew 25. So in the Savior's parable of the talents, which is what's found in Matthew 25, the term talent is often referred to as money, but the parable of talents can prompt us to ponder how we are using any of our blessings, not just money. After reading this parable, you might make a list of some of the blessings and responsibilities that Heavenly Father has entrusted to you, and what does He expect you to do with these blessings? How can you use these gifts more wisely? So let's look at Matthew 25, verse 14 through 30. So in this parable, you have a traveling man who's going on a vacation in a place far away. Okay, he's got servants. He's got 3 servants, and before he leaves, he gives one of his servants 5 talents. To another servant, he gives 2, and to another servant, he gives 1. Now, this is what's interesting. This actually stood out to me when I was reading this. Is it says every man according to his several ability, because one of the initial questions was, well, why doesn't he just give all of them 5 talents each? Why does he give one 5, another 2, and another just 1? And it's because several abilities. Every man has several abilities. We do things differently. We individually have several and different abilities. My wife's abilities at certain things are different than what my abilities are, and vice versa. Okay? And the Lord knows that. And so that's why each of us individually are given different responsibilities and different levels of responsibilities, right? Some people, in fact, I actually always laugh because I love watching Fiddler on the Roof, right? And the main character, Tevye, talks about being cursed with riches and talks about wishing that was his curse, is being cursed with riches. But what's the reality is if Tevye had those riches, could he use them wisely? Could he use them the way the Lord wanted him to? Whereas he had different responsibilities and didn't have riches because the Lord wanted him to do other things. Okay. So what happens is while the servant is gone, while the master is gone, the servants go about their business, but with the command to multiply their earnings or the money that the master has given them. So the first one goes out and he makes 5 other talents. So he doubles his money. He goes from 5 to 10. Same with the guy that had received 2. He doubled his money. But the one who had a single talent went and put it and buried it in the ground and hid it until the Lord came back and until the master came back. When he came back, he asked each of his servants to bring forth their results. And the first 2 showed that they had doubled their money. At which point in time the Lord said unto them, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee a ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. And so verse 20 and 21 really are the premise of why the church, from a financial perspective, is doing what it's doing with the finances. It isn't just taking that money and burying it in the ground and then just hoping someday that it will be of any use to the Lord. They're actually going out and putting it to work. They're multiplying the money. They're using it to grow and to be even greater than what the Lord's already blessed them with. Because if you notice, let me go back to this article real quickly. Notice this real quickly. The church takes in $7 billion in tithing each year, spends $6 billion in religious and charitable causes, which means it has 1 billion left over. But how much does it say the church has right now? 150 billion. Okay, it's been 60 years since that first situation with President McKay. And they weren't even making $1 billion a year then. I mean, maybe they were, but even if we were to assume they were, even if they were making and had $1 billion left over every year from 1962 to 2023, that's 61 years. They should only have 61 billion. If all they did was just take it and put it straight into a bank account and let it sit. But did they do that? Nope. They've invested it. They've diversified it. They've put it to work. Now they have more than double what they had as left over. So this right here, this 150 billion, is a direct replication of the first servant and the second servant, for that fact. They doubled their money. Okay. I hope this is starting to make sense as to why the church is doing what it is, and that this whole article and situation with the 60 Minutes isn't anything to lose your faith or your testimony over. This isn't anything where the church is going out and using the tithing funds inappropriately or inaccurately. Okay, and if that's what you think is going on, I hate to break it to you, you haven't fully understood the concepts. You don't understand what's going on over, with how this is run. And I would encourage you to continue to study this topic and to give it some more time. Review the things that we've been talking about up to this point, and kind of keep with this and to give it time, and that knowledge and testimony will come. But this is part of, I think, why I wanted to bring this up, is because, one, I worry and see this as a tactic of Satan trying to get at those whose seeds do not have fertile ground right now, whose testimonies are weak, are not overly deep. Okay, and to hopefully give this as a contrary to any thoughts or beliefs of doubt you might have as a result of what's gone on with this article in this situation. Now, the last thing I kind of want to pivot on here is now talking a little bit more about this notion of the law of consecration. Because again, the tithing is the lower law. The law of consecration is a higher law that is coming. When the time comes, when we're living the celestial law, we are going to have a change, if you will, in process. And a change in process, just understand, doesn't negate or make the previous process wrong or false. It's a change in process. Things have changed. Things have evolved. One of the things I want to share here is a quote from Joseph Fielding Smith. Why it's important that we understand and we wrap our head around and we get the support and the buy-in of the concept of tithing. From Joseph Fielding Smith, he says, quote, "Those who cannot abide the law of tithing cannot partake of this law of consecration or the higher law, and they will be deprived of an inheritance when the inheritances are divided." Because this is a future state that's coming, and for most of us alive on the earth today, we may very well be living into that celestial state. At least that's the hope. We will get into the celestial state. Part of living a celestial life is being prepared and trained to live a celestial life. So we are doing that now through tithing. Understanding the law of consecration and stewardship. There are 4 points that you need to understand when it comes to the law of consecration and stewardship. First and foremost, fundamentally, bottom line, the earth is the Lord's. Everything in it, everything on it, everything in the sky, everything under the water or under the ground, the technology that we're using right now, the clothes on our back, the food in our belly, the roof over our head, all of it is the Lord's. He is simply, through his kindness and generosity, allowing us to enjoy these things. Okay. 2, all men are children of God. This is a fundamental premise that if you struggle with this viewpoint, if you watch the news or social media and you look at a group of people and you have a level of hatred or anger or despising towards them, yes, there are evil people in the world today, but, and this is a huge but, not my huge but a big but, all men are children of God. It doesn't matter how they're living their life. They are still a child of God. Okay. We have an obligation, a responsibility to care for God's children. That's why the church spends as much as it does with its humanitarian efforts. And that's one of the points that it talks about in that article about where the funds are going, is to help take care of the children of God. I just read in a separate article that the church donated to a program in San Francisco to help with the homeless issue that's going on over there. Okay, and the church has done many similar investments and donations over the years, all for the betterment and helping the children of God. In fact, during this last general conference, I think it was the news hour break that was in between conference. They talked about some of their efforts. One of the programs that the church has invested in and donated to helps provide food for those that are starving in third world countries. Okay, but when we understand these four principles, it makes it more clear what exactly is the law of consecration and stewardship and why would we live this way. 3, every man or woman must be respected as a free agent. It's important to understand that participation in the law of consecration and stewardship will be voluntary. And this is the number one distinction between consecration and socialism. I've listened to people talk who say, well, aren't the Latter-day Saints in favor of socialism, part of their whole caring for and everybody shares and things of that nature? And one of the biggest difference between socialism and consecration, agency. One word. Socialism, you have no choice. You are forced to participate by your government, which is why socialism has never worked in any country it's ever been implemented in. Sorry. But where consecration is put into play, and it's done because people are respected as free agents and are allowed to participate. When you choose to participate in the law of consecration, you're all in, and you get to enjoy all of the blessings that come from it. And if you so choose, you can leave. You can leave the society and the program of consecration. You can take what's been given to you as your inheritance up to that point. You can take it with you. But you now lose out on any future benefits or blessings that come as a result of being part of a community or society that participates and practices in the law of consecration. Notice that none of these bullet points, and I know we haven't gotten to 4 just yet, but none of them are predicated on your membership in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or in any church for that fact. All men and women are God's children, and everyone must be respected as a free agent, which means anyone can join the program, the law of consecration, even if you are not affiliated with the church that is tied to the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. You could be atheist. You could be of a non-Christian religion, and you could still say, you know what, I'm willing to live by the rules though, and I see the benefits, and I want to live that way. I don't necessarily want to be part of your church, but I still want to live the law of consecration and be part of society and take full advantage of those benefits. The Lord will say, come on in. That's all we ask, is you live by the rules, but you have your agency. You can leave at any time. This is not forced upon you. And 4th, the government of the order is vested in a central agency. So I was reading up on this last one here a little bit more, and really what this one talks about is how are disputes settled. Now, part of understanding the law of consecration is that what somebody may possess, all of it gets turned into the bishop, okay, the leader of the local congregation. The bishop then takes all of that and in discussion with you understands what are your needs to continue on and to survive and to even thrive and to, and have a good life. And the bishop then gives you back what is necessary to maintain and to be taken care of. So, for example, you may come with 100 acres of land. You may be bringing in an annual revenue of $10 million. You bring that into the bishop, and the Lord, and the bishop comes back and says, okay, well, based off of the things that you're doing, you don't really need all 100 acres. You only need 10 acres. And instead of 10 million, you only need 2. Because that takes care of your needs. You're going to have what you need to run your organization or your business or your household. You're going to be able to have your clothing and your food. Everything else that's left over, we're going to now redistribute and use to provide for the poor. Now, what may happen, and this is the stewardship notion of it. Okay, I got definitions that explain this a little better. The bishop may come back and say, okay, you turned in 100 acres, or you turned over 100 acres. You personally only need 10. I'm going to ask that you now be a steward over the remaining 90 because we're going to use that for the poor. So while you no longer technically own the 90, I'm going to ask that you still maintain a level of responsibility for the 90 because that 90 is now going to go towards those who are in need. And this is how we get to an elevated lifestyle And again, you can choose to live this way. It's your choice. You don't have to. There are benefits that will come as a result of it, but if you want to leave, you can leave. Now, the thing is, and when I was reading up on this, is that this decision has to be mutual between the bishop and you, the participant. The bishop doesn't get full say. Otherwise, that would give the bishop all the power and could lead to unjust decision making, and it could also result in hurt feelings and between you and the bishop, thinking that he wasn't fair or just in his assessment. But you don't also get 100% say. It's a dialogue. It's a back and forth. It's a conversation. Now, if you get to basically a stalemate, a point where neither can agree, then there is a committee that will review and evaluate and provide the resolution. And one of the key characteristics is the bishop cannot be part of that committee. Okay. So this fourth one is that how the central agency manages disputes. And again, we're talking future state here, celestial lifestyle. Interesting to try and comprehend. What are your thoughts about all of this, living this way, the law of consecration and stewardship? Think about it. Drop in the comments below. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about living this way. It's definitely an interesting way to think about life. It'll definitely be a mind shift for a lot of people to be okay with this. All right, wrap it up. Definitions of consecration versus stewardship. Let me pull this. There we go. Consecrate or consecration. To consecrate means to make holy or to fully dedicate yourself to something holy, such as a principle, a cause, or a task. So today, we can still live a law of consecration today with the work that we do now. Our job, our spending time with each other, our way of earning an income. We can still consecrate today. We can make those efforts holy. We can fully dedicate ourselves to doing so in a righteous and an honest and an ethical and a moral way. Okay? But that's not necessarily the same thing as stewardship. Okay, so we can consecrate our time, our talents, our efforts. In fact, if you've gone through the temple, that's what you have done, is you've consecrated your efforts to further the kingdom of God. So if that means that you need to take some of your personal money to help somebody that's poor or needy, or you need to help a missionary, cover their cost of being a missionary, that's what this is for. Now, in contrast is a stewardship. A steward is a person who is employed by someone of wealth and means to manage and supervise that person's properties and financial affairs. And in this case, we're talking about the Lord. The Lord is someone of wealth and means. I mean, he's the ultimate wealth and means, right? And as stewards, we are to supervise the Lord's properties and financial affairs. A steward is entrusted with a great deal of responsibility, but the true steward never forgets that the properties belong to the master. Okay? So the caring of the land, the caring of the money, the caring of the building, of the equipment, of whatever, is done with the understanding that it's not yours, it's the Lord's. I've just been asked to take care of it. And when you think that way, think about your personal belongings now. Think about your own home. My home is not mine. I'm a steward of it. So how would I treat my home as a steward and to make sure that the Lord's home is taken care of? It's cleaned regularly. It's maintained. I minimize any sorts of unnecessary damage or harm to the property. I mow my lawn in a reasonable time. I beautify the grounds as much as I can. Okay. Think about your cars. As a steward to the Lord's car, and this is actually something that we adopted from a family friend of ours several years ago. They had an old truck that they owned, and we asked them one time if we could borrow their truck to do. We had to move something, and their response was, "Just put the gas at the same level when you got it, but two, understand it's not our truck; it's the Lord's truck." That's the whole reason we own this truck. We actually bought this truck simply for the fact of to be a steward over it, and knowing that people would need to borrow a truck from time to time to move things. So we help as a steward, making sure that the oil gets changed and that other things get done, taken care of the truck to keep it running. But it's not our truck, and my wife and I, we have tried really hard to adopt that mindset with a lot of things in our life. It's not our house; it's the Lord's house. In fact, several months ago, we had a family that was running low on food. And so we have been really putting a lot of energy and effort in building up our food storage. And I was talking with my wife after church when we realized this situation. And I said, we need to give them some food. When she's like, well, where are we going to get the food from? I said, well, out of the storage. And I love my wife, and I could see it on her face. It took her a second to process it because I don't think initially she wanted to jump straight into this idea. But she looked at me and she said, because it's the Lord's food. I said, that's right. It's not ours. It's here for us to use if we need it. But in a lot of ways, we're stewards over this food storage. So if somebody else who is of greater need than us needs it, that's what we can do. And so what did we do? We took a couple of grocery bags. We loaded up items that helped make complete meals, gave them enough to get them through the week, took it over and gave it to them. And then when they were like, well, why are you giving us all your food? We didn't ask for it. I know you didn't ask for it, but we know you need it. And we even told them, you're not taking our food. Don't feel bad. It's not our food. It's the Lord's food. All he did was tell us to bring it to you. And that's what we're doing. So even today, you can still be a steward and think like a steward over a lot of your mortal possessions. Your technology. Okay. I have access to a lot of equipment that allows me to produce this podcast, right? It's not mine per se, it's the Lord. So I'm a steward over it to help use it as a tool to share the gospel, to share gospel principles and concepts to those who to help others think differently about the gospel and to hopefully digest things in a way that makes sense. So I want to wrap up with this here. I want you to think about, comment below what your thoughts and feelings are about our topic, our conversation about stewards. The reality is it's not an easy concept to live. That's the point, right? It requires work. It requires effort. The Lord knows that. And he knows that it's not going to be easy for you to always want to, quote unquote, give of your things or your time or your talents. But think about other ways that you can serve. You have multiple talents, and your talents aren't always just your checkbook. Me personally, talent of understanding how to run this kind of technology and helping people. If there's anybody that ever reached out and wanted to know how to do this, I'd be more than happy to spend time to show them and to walk them through it. Okay. I've got many other talents. I've got my own professional background. In fact, I spent almost an hour the other day with a brother sharing with him what I do for work because he's on the job hunt himself, trying to kind of reinvent himself professionally and understanding a little bit about who he is and kind of the way he thinks and acts. And I thought, what I do, he might find of interest. So I sat with him for 45 minutes and we talked it over and I showed him, here's what I do for a normal day to day. What do you think? What questions do you have? And one of the follow-ups is to meet with him to look at possibly putting his resume together in a way to see if we can't get him into a job in a similar type of work. Okay. The Lord has blessed me with these talents and with these skills. And so these are ways that you can share your talents. You can just share your knowledge. I mean, that in of itself is a huge blessing. Think about all the things that you know that other people may not know or know it as well as you do. And the reality is that's true. You can't tell me there's not something that you know better than somebody else. And I don't say that to mean that you brag or that you have a big head about it. But in fact, this is actually a friend of mine, Dino Watt. If anybody know Dino, check him out. He's a good guy. Dino, if you're watching this, thank you for all your help over the years. He talked about that part of humility, or the definition of humility is understanding that at times there are things that you know that somebody else doesn't know. And conversely, there's times where somebody knows something better than what you know. And the true humility is to be able to recognize the difference in those times. And that when you find yourself in a position of knowing something that somebody else doesn't know, that you give freely of that knowledge. And that you give and that you teach and that you share and you help educate. So I'll end with that. Think about your times, your talents, how you can consecrate yourself, what it's like to be a steward for the Lord. Practice now being a steward. I hope this was a good lesson for you guys. Comment below what you thought. Anything else that you'd like to see or hear, please let me know, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks again. See you next week.